Okay guys, this video is so long overdue, but I'm finally doing it. And I'm talking about the House of Aramis today. Fragrances that are classics for men. A house that was under Estee Lauder. And funny thing, a lot of the fragrances that are targeted to men had a equivalent in the ladies' offerings as well. So it's very interesting as I was doing my research. So anyway, today I'm talking about Aramis fragrances, starting with the original Aramis, ending up with Aramis Havana that was launched very last. I'm not talking about any of the newer fragrances, but these are the classic fragrances that you can get very, very inexpensively. So I'm going to tell you all about them coming right up. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Sebastian with Smelling Great Fragrance Reviews. That's right, today we're talking about the House of Aramis. And I'm not talking about the more recent offerings from this house. And basically I'm covering 7 different fragrances that were classics that were launched as early as 1966 for the very first offering, this one right here. And then we're ending up with Havana, which was the last of the fragrances I'm going to discuss to you. This one right here. This was launched in 1994. So before we do that though, if this is your first time tuning into the channel and you still haven't subscribed to the channel, please click the subscribe button below and also click the bell so that you'll be notified for future videos and giveaways. That's right, this is a house that is really, really close to my heart because my dad used to wear the fragrances. My dad actually wore this one. My dad actually wore, let's see, these two. This is one that I've been really obsessed with trying, and I've smelled in the past, never really wore. This is one that I wore back in the late 80s, and this is one that I wore in the early 90s. So those are the 7 different fragrances that I'm going to talk to you about. We're going to start with the first one, Aramis. So Aramis, launched in 1966, comes in many different flankers, but this one that I picked up for about $28 is a 110 ml bottle, so it's very inexpensive. It's considered a woody chypre. So there is a Estee Lauder equivalent of this, and it smells similar to the woman's version, and that was called Azuré. But we're only talking about the men's version, and since Aramis was under the Estee Lauder house, I feel like Estee Lauder was releasing fragrances for ladies, obviously, and then she was also making the men's equivalent of those fragrances for her husband, or, you know, for men. So Aramis was 1966 Woody Chypre, created by Bernard Chant. In fact, a lot of these are created by Bernard Chant. And we've brought up Bernard Chant, Nadalia and I, reviewing this particular fragrance here. And this one has its ladies equivalent called Aromatics Elixir. But he created this, and again, it's a 110 ml bottle eau de toilette for 28 bucks. It's very, very inexpensive. And I spoke a lot about chypres with you guys. And the 3 fragrances that I'm going to speak to you about first are chypres. And I feel like chypres were really, really popular. And once the whole oak moss banning thing came up, they kind of like declined in popularity. But as I said, this goes way back to 1966, but my dad wore this, and this one actually is one that just brings back many, many memories for me. So what are the notes with this one? There's lots of leather, there's oak moss, patchouli, aldehydes, musk, myrrh, sandalwood, sage, vetiver, jasmine, clover, artemisia, thyme, amber, cardamom. So it's a chypre fragrance, but it's very, very spicy. It's also very, very woody. And you know, it does have a weakness about it currently. From what I remember, it was a lot more solid. It was a lot more depth to it, even though back then, when my dad wore in the late 70s, early 80s, a really, really, you know, strong version of this fragrance, and it still was an eau de toilette concentration. So, I mean, you know, this actually has the women's equivalent, as I said, called Azuré. I don't know if Estee Lauder still makes that particular fragrance, Azuré, but it's interesting that they did that, and how similar the fragrances were, even though, you know, one was targeted to men and one was targeted to women. The fragrances were kind of like from the same family, in fact, really smelling close. But what I like about this one is the fact that it's got this very fresh, almost barbershop-y quality to it, even though it's a woody chypre. But it's very, very woody and very leathery. The oak moss in here, I feel like it's major toned down, but the patchouli is pretty prominent. And you know what? When I put my nose on this one, it really does take me back to remember when I was very young, 9, 8 years old, 10 years old, and you know, stealing sprays from my dad. And I love this bottle. This is just a very, very classic bottle that I absolutely love. And the name just totally brings back nostalgic memories of me being a kid, smelling fragrances that my dad wore. So good. This is so good. And it's 28 bucks. It's nice to have something like this, you know, laying around. And again, it's not necessarily a fougere. We do have a fougere, or a couple of fougeres here that are coming up that could be a little more interesting, but still I feel like this style is definitely solid. People that are interested in exploring classics, especially for men, if you guys are men, you definitely want to check out something like this. As far as a similar smelling fragrance that could be the equivalent of this, I'm assuming, even though Pasha Cartier is not a chypre, it's a fougere, it does have similar smells to it, to that one. I guess you can also go into the direction of, I'm trying to think of what fragrances would work. I don't know of a modern rendition of this particular fragrance currently, because it's a classic, obviously. But I feel like anything powerhouse-ish that was targeted to men back in the day could kind of come close to it, because it does have that classic smell, especially since the fact that it was launched in 1966. Anyway, that's Aramis 1966. And I feel like right after that, they went and started launching other fragrances under the Aramis division, and they gave us this particular fragrance, 900. Now this particular fragrance, I'm absolutely obsessed with the way this smells. I feel like this is my favorite out of all of them. This is also considered a woody chypre, and what I like about this one compared to this one has more boldness. This one has some unique, slightly more feminine touches, or I wouldn't want to call it feminine because it's not a very feminine fragrance, but slightly more, you know, unisex touches, because this one also has rose, and that rose is prominent. And again, as I said, both of them are considered woody chypres. This one is, it's a little more interesting to me because that patchouli is really, really big. That oak moss is also big, even though, you know, the oak moss is kind of like butchered in here compared to the original. I feel like you can still pick it up, whatever version of the oak moss that they're giving us, but meshed with that rose note in here, it's to die for. It's a really, really wonderful fragrance. And for me, the reason I love this one so much is because I was left a lot of impression with ladies that my mom was friends with who wore Aromatics Elixir. So this one is compared to Aromatics Elixir, and I do have a video on the channel where Dahlia and I are, you know, comparing this to Aromatics Elixir if you're curious to watch it. But Aramis 900 was launched in 1973. Again, it's a woody chypre, same perfumer as the original Aramis Bernard Chant, and there is a woman's equivalent, as I said, Aromatics Elixir, and so it's retailing currently for $35 as 100 ml. So it's very, very inexpensive. And if you have ever smelled Aromatics Elixir, what I like about that fragrance is the patchouli and the oak moss with the rose. Again, similar notes here. They're just adjusted differently or accordingly for this version to be more masculine leaning, and then the ladies version a little more feminine leaning. But I have both, and I would wear both because they're very similar to me. But again, this one has notes of rose, civet, oak moss, carnation, patchouli, geranium, lily of the valley, vetiver, coriander, green notes, sandalwood, and it's really, really amazing. Even though this, I think, is an eau de cologne, or it could be an eau de toilette, but I feel like even though it has a very light concentration, the lingering power is great, because I feel like the notes that are in here are the notes that will actually last long. And what I like about this one, again, it's not a dense fragrance. A lot of these are not dense at all. The notes that they're using do linger quite a lot longer. So even though it could be eau de cologne or eau de toilette, they'll stay with you for quite some time because of some of the notes. And those are the kind of notes I first started smelling when I was very young, you know, when my dad was wearing. So it left a major impression. That's kind of like why I like oak moss and why I like patchouli and things like that. Anyway, this is a classic. This is probably my favorite, but it's really close with another one here. I'm going to tell you what it is. But this is Aramis 900, launched in 1973, created by Bernard Chant. And again, you can pick that up for 35 bucks currently at the discounters like Fragrance X and Fragrance Net. All right, so this next one is Devon. Launched in 1977, and this one's considered just a flat-out chypre. And again, once again, it's created by Bernard Chant. So this one, oh man, the smell is so amazing, absolutely amazing. It reminds me a little bit of Yatagan, I don't know if you guys know that one from Caron. I think they both came out around the same time. But this one, according to my notes, there is a woman's equivalent again, and that is Alliage. I don't know if this fragrance is still around by Estee Lauder. Again, Estee Lauder owns Aramis, and Estee Lauder, you know, has a husband, and she was making men's fragrances, trying to make versions of the women's fragrances as men's fragrances. This is from my research. I don't know how true this is, but this one actually is really inexpensive, 23 bucks for 100 ml. It's considered a Chypre. Again, Chypre is basically fragrances that are inspired by the island of Cyprus. And there's a whole video I've done with Dana explaining the whole Chypre genre, and I did a whole week of Chypre videos if you're curious to find out more about Chypres. This one smells so good, guys. It smells very green, but on me it gets animalic. There's a muskiness that comes through, like a fuzzy, warm, like a animalic-like muskiness that might be off-putting to some. I feel like, even though they don't mention castoreum, I feel like there's a castoreum note in here that kind of is very prominent. Very interesting. But what I like about this one, and the reason why it reminds me of Yatagan from Caron, is because there's a pine needle note. There's lots of pine needles here. Pine needles, leather, there's galbanum, aldehydes, oak moss, carnation, sandalwood, artemisia, labdanum, patchouli, jasmine, musk. As you can see, Devon right there, the color of the label, that color is what I smell. It's a very, very green smell, but very piney, very foresty. And just keep in mind, if you do get this one, because of what I'm praising it, just keep in mind it has a major muskiness. So be warned, it might come off very musky on you. I feel like out of the bottle it doesn't, but once it touches skin, chemistry kind of brings out this muskiness. So that might be sexy to some. I feel like it's a little overwhelming for me on me when I'm wearing it, but out of the bottle, it smells amazing. It smells like a forest, like a pine forest. Anyway, this is Devon from the House of Aramis. It's wonderful. It's really, really awesome. And again, these are so long lasting as far as smells go because of some of the notes they're using and the types of notes. Even though, as I said, oak moss is now outlawed with the amount you could use, but I feel like everything else they're using in there has lasting power to make a fragrance like this to last, even though you think that it's going to be pretty weak. Okay, this next one is another fragrance created by Bernard Chant, and this is JHL. And what I like about this one is the fact that now we're moving from Chypres to Oriental Spicy, because this is an ultra spicy concoction. And once again, this is created by Bernard Chant, and there is a woman's equivalent of this one, and the woman's equivalent of this one is Cinnabar. So again, Estee Lauder Cinnabar, and then Aramis, JHL, and both brands are Estee Lauder owned obviously. And so my dad wore this one, and I really loved the way it smelled on him. It smelled great. It's spicy. It's cinnamony. And Cinnabar, cinnamon, I think that's kind of the name is taken from. But again, this is JHL, the men's version. And this one has cinnamon, carnation. Now, carnation does come up a lot in classic fragrances. And I also wanted to mention there's also aldehydes that has been coming up a lot in classic fragrances. I don't see aldehydes too much now, but carnation did come up. And carnation, to me, when I smell like not the big carnations, but the small carnations which have actually a fragrance or a scent, reminds me of cloves, and carnation and cinnamon kind of have the similar kind of a scent style. But then you also have benzoin here, and there's those aldehydes: sandalwood, rose, amber, patchouli, labdanum, ylang ylang, fir, musk, and orange. So in the end, it's like a ultra spicy cinnamony fragrance that was very, very popular in that era, I believe. You know, opium came out like 5 years prior, all that good stuff. So it's just spiciness was really being utilized in perfumery. And this one actually, even though I feel like it's not as strong as it used to be, because when I remember smelling this, it was a lot denser. It seems now it's gotten a lot weaker, and the smell is sort of like a spitting image of the original smell. But still, if this is all I can get, it's pretty fantastic. It's a great, great scent. Only problem is, as I was buying all these fragrances, originally I had owned Aramis 900, which is this, for the longest time. And then I've also owned for the longest time Havana, so I didn't have to buy those, but I was looking for the rest of the collection. This one I could not find at discounters, so this one's only available as a suggested retail for 70 bucks. But you know what? I wanted the whole entire collection of the classics so I can do this video, so I paid full retail minus 10 or 15% discount because of the pandemic. So I ended up buying it for that price. But everything else is very inexpensive. And if you like a spicy fragrance, you might want to try and get a sample to see if you're interested in buying a full bottle. Because as I said, I can't find this one at discounters. And it's sad to think that maybe these are all going to be removed at one point. Glad they are available. And one more thing I didn't say, a lot of these fragrances that I wore and my dad wore, they were not in these bottles. The only one that's in its original bottle is this one. Everything else has been put into these more uniform bottles because every one of them had different bottles in the past, and now they've kind of uniformed them except for the original Aramis. But I'm thinking these might actually eventually be, you know, phased away because I don't know how long Aramis will stick around, because I think of brands and I go to Instagram and find, you know, their Instagram account, and I don't see one for Aramis, so they've never really done one. And this particular collection had come out in the early 2010s when they redid the bottles in this uniform bottle collection. So I don't know if they'll be around forever. We shall see, especially for the fact that JHL I can't find at discounters. Maybe there's not a lot of stock around. Anyway, those are those four. Now we're going to a second fragrance that was launched in 1982, because JHL was launched in 1982, and also Tuscany Per Uomo was launched in 1982. Look at that beautiful green juice, guys. I love that. Compared to the juice of JHL. Really, really beautiful colors here. But Tuscany Per Uomo is a fragrance that my dad wore, and this is considered an aromatic fougere. This one's currently selling for $33 at a 100 ml bottle, and what I've compared this to is a similar, a little more spicy version of Azzaro Pour Homme. So if you like Azzaro Pour Homme, you will like this. I also think that this one has a little more strong lemony quality to it, but there is no woman's equivalent, because fougères were typically, the barbershop fragrances were typically for men. I don't think women ever wore fougères. Maybe they did, I can't see. Chypres for sure, but not fougère. So that's why I couldn't find an equivalent to this in a woman's version like the previous four, as I was telling you. But as the one that came up with this one has similarities to Azzaro Pour Homme. But this one has a big dose of lemon. There's the anise note from Azzaro Pour Homme. Leather, lavender, bergamot, caraway. Caraway is pretty prominent here. It does pop when you put it on skin. It doesn't smell when you smell it out of the bottle. So caraway and cumin are kind of similar. Caraway is the less pungent of the types of spice. So if you like the idea of cumin, but you think it's too strong, look into fragrances that feature caraway, because it's not as strong as cumin. So caraway, lime, oak moss, patchouli, cinnamon, basil, tarragon, orange blossom. So in the end, it's very aromatic, lots of herbs and lots of spices with that leather. It's very woody, it's very aromatic, it's very green. I love it. And I love this one. My dad wore this one, and it just, the days when he was wearing it, and his bottle, this is not the same bottle that he had. I just always would reach for it and smell it. I wouldn't always be able to spray the fragrances because, you know, I was told not to as a kid, but I would always smell it, and it smelled great. And this brings back major memories. If you like fougères, definitely check this out. If you like Azzaro Pour Homme, definitely check this out. Again, it's a little more spicy, it's a little more lemony, so astringency is a little more prominent here. Anyway, that's Aramis Tuscany Per Uomo. So the last two fragrances are ones that I actually wore myself. So this next one is called New West for Him. In 1988 this was launched. I wore it in late 89, early 90s, and it was in a different bottle. It was a unique bottle. And this one, I feel like if you guys like fougères or aromatic fragrances, you might want to check this one out, because to me it still smells great. It is a lighter rendition of the original. I don't remember it being this light, but you might dig it because it doesn't smell very tired like some of you might find the last several fragrances that I spoke to you about. So Aramis New West for Him was launched in 1988. Several years later they launched a woman's version, but I don't think they initially had called it New West for Him when it came out. It was just called New West. And this was actually right after the start of the aquatic movement, because this is considered an aromatic aquatic fragrance, and this was created by Harry Fremont. And this one, get this guys, currently there's bottles on the discounters or at the discounters for 20 bucks. And I really, really love the way this smells. Really do. So this one has notes of pine, cedar, juniper, oak moss, sea notes, mint, aldehydes, bergamot, bay laurel, watermelon, leather, lavender, geranium, artemisia. It's very green, it's piney, but it's also meshed with the sea notes and the aquatic notes. It's just a wonderful concoction. I was obsessed with this smell. I was just at the end of my high school years, and something about the bottle really captured me because I'm a visual person, and the logo on as you can see here was on that bottle, but it was a different bottle from what I remember. This is not the bottle, and I just loved that about it. But it also was a beefy fragrance. It was strong, it was long lasting, and it smelled fresh, very, very like aquatic mixed with all the like aromatic and piney woody notes. Just amazing. If I didn't say who this was created by, it was created by Harry Fremont. Again, it's currently selling for about 20 bucks online. I feel like it's totally recommended. Again, it's not as beefy as I would want it to be, but for 20 bucks, I think it's definitely worth it. If you like classic aromatic fougere-like or aquatic fragrances combined together. So that's Aramis New West for him, launched in 1988. And the last fragrance I'm going to talk to you about is Aramis Havana. And this is the one that I've owned the longest out of these current bottles. This is the first one I bought in these current bottles. This is the second one I bought in these current bottles. The rest I recently bought during this pandemic so I can do this video, and I was looking for deals online, and that's why I'm doing it now. So Aramis Havana was launched in 1994. I wore this in when I was going to film school because I love the way this smells. Again, it's a spitting image of the original because the original was in this beautiful frosted greenish blue bottle and was a lot stronger. And I feel like it's still fine here and just still smells great to this day. It's an Oriental spicy and is created by Natalie Festauer with Xavier Renard. This one also is about 20 bucks for 100 ml. It's definitely worth it. The last two are definitely more modern if you don't like classic fragrances, because the previous ones are all like early 80s and 70s and 60s, but this is a 90s fragrance, and this one's, you know, late 80s. So I feel like they jumped on that aquatic craze that was just starting in the late 80s, and they created this New West. But Havana is awesome, guys. I've met the perfumer Natalie Festauer. She's still a perfumer to this day, so she must have made this when she was very young, according to my notes, because she's not that old now. So this one has notes of tobacco, patchouli, oak moss, cinnamon, fir, mandarin orange, basil, carnation, and a lot more notes. But it's wonderful. This one's amazing. It's like a great tobacco with lots of oriental notes and spicy notes together. And again, this is the most modern, and you gotta love tobacco to wear it. That's why it's called Havana, obviously. So I should check it out. If you like tobacco and if you like deals, these are definitely worth it, especially these last two, as I said, since they are definitely more modern, and definitely they should satisfy mature noses that are appreciative of, you know, classic fragrances. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the Aramis men's line. I hope to get into the more modern fragrances sooner than later. So if there are any current more modern releases from the Aramis house, do let me know which ones. And also, guys, if you're older, have you worn these fragrances, or do you remember your dad wearing any of these fragrances? Because, you know, dads definitely wore these fragrances. And also, even though you might be young and you might have a palate for this kind of fragrance, do you like the idea of some of these fragrances? Let me know which one sounds great to you. Now, my guest Dahlia always talks about this one. She even has a bottle. She loves it. And as I said, we have reviewed Aramis 900 with the Clarins or Clinique Aromatics Elixir. So let me know if you like the idea of any of these fragrances so I find out. And other than that, guys, thanks so much for watching this very long video. Please do like this video. Please share it. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I'll be back with more videos very soon. Have a good one. Goodbye.